What's up, guys? So in this video, I'm talking to you about the best lens for the Sony ZV-E1. And I'm going to talk about the lens that I would recommend, and I'm probably going to talk about like 2 lenses in general, maybe 3. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So the best lens that I recommend for this camera in general for most people is going to be the 20mm 1.8. And the reason I like that focal length is it has, first of all, it's affordable. It has a maximum aperture of 1.8. So you can use this for just really good wide angle shots if you're trying to capture like a landscape, if you're trying to vlog yourself, like this will work. If you use active, I wouldn't use the dynamic stabilization, I would use the active stabilization because the dynamic crops in too far and the active only crops into 1.2. So when you're using the active, it becomes probably more like a 23 or 24mm, and you can still get by with that as a vlogging focal length. Now, the other cool thing is, like, if you are a content creator, you can use this same lens for just doing like talking headshots. And the cool thing about the ZV-E1 is you can actually zoom in. So you can actually zoom in. It's going to change your aperture a little bit, but you can still zoom in to probably about 50mm before that aperture changes from about 1.8 to f4, and you kind of lose a little bit of the quality. But I would say in general, like, it's gonna be just a really good all-around lens for most people. 20mm, definitely consider it. I think it's gonna be a really good lens. Now, if you're vlogging, all you're doing is vlogging, you're not going to be doing anything else, I would actually, this might surprise you a little bit, but I would actually use an APS-C lens. I would just say get the Sony 15mm 1.4. And I know you're saying like that's an APS-C lens and this is a full frame camera, but hear me out. So the 15mm 1.4, if what it's going to do is when you're using the stabilization on this camera, it's going to crop in anyway. So active stabilization crops in 1.2. The dynamic stabilization is going to crop into like 1.5 or 1.6. So when you put an APS-C lens on your camera, it's a crop factor of 1.5. So you're already going to be cropping in your lens anyway. And so why not use this on a lens like an APS-C lens, like the Sony 15mm 1.4? Because if you're vlogging, that 15mm is going to become around a 22.5mm, or maybe even a little bit wider depending on your stabilization mode. But it's not going to crop in as much, and you can still use it as like a good vlogging lens. And what you can also do, if it's not wide enough for you, you can use the Sony 11mm 1.8, and when it crops in, it's going to be actually a 19mm. So this is kind of like your perfect vlogging lens, because you probably want like a 19mm or a 20mm, and so I would just recommend using the Sony 10mm. You can get them for like $500. It's a really good lens. It's not that expensive. And the thing is, this lens is so light. So you put it on this small body already, and it's just going to be like the perfect vlogging lens. And then you add that active stabilization. You have this perfect low light, really good sharp lens, and you can vlog with it with really good stabilization. And then I would just have like a secondary lens, because you don't want to buy like this expensive full frame camera and just be using an APS-C lens with it. So that's the lens I would definitely recommend for vlogging. So here's my arrangement. I think that for most people, if you just want one lens, go get the 20mm 1.8. It's a full frame lens. It's great. If you want to do vlogging as well, I would say get either the 11mm or the 15mm. And for everything else, I would say get a 35mm. If you're going to add like one more lens, you want the 35mm 1.8. You can get like the Sony version, you can get the Samyang version, you can even get the Sony the Sony 35mm 1.4. This is an awesome lens as well. It's probably the best. Those 3 lenses, I would say, is what you're going to want for this setup. You could even get the 24mm 1.8 and then just zoom it in to 35mm if you wanted that focal length later. For me, what I do currently, I use the 20 millimeter as my vlogging lens. I use the 24 millimeter 1.4 as my talking headshot. And what I do is I'm using it right now and I zoom it in. I'm using it in APS-C mode. So right now it's at 35 like the 35 millimeter focal length. And that 1.4 aperture becomes like in 1.8. So it's like a little bit more close up. I think it's a little more comfortable. I think this is kind of the best focal length for like a talking headshot. And that's what I would recommend for most people is, yeah, one of those lenses. If you could have two lenses, I would say get the 20 millimeter and a 35 millimeter. If you could have three lenses, get that APS-C lens, either the 11 millimeter or the 15 millimeter. They're going to be awesome for vlogging because it's going to be zooming in anyways, and it's so lightweight. So that's what I would recommend. I know I mentioned a lot of lenses today. I didn't mean to. Just stick with the 20 millimeter for most things. But if you're going to be vlogging, I think the 11 millimeter 1.8 is the sweet spot. Just use the APS-C lens. And then if you want that really good stabilization, it's going to have that crop factor. So it's going to be zooming in anyway, and you're going to be wasting all that glass real estate if you use any other lens. So you might as well just get a cheaper APS-C lens anyway. All right, guys, so what are your thoughts on this? Like, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, what do you think is the best focal length for, like, content creators in general or for vlogging? I just kind of want to hear your ideas on the subject. And I hope you like this video. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks.